Hello. We are now going to take up the issue of US versus China in the future, say in 10 years from now. A straightforward way to predict the future of the economy is to look at the past performance of the economy, like US and China. And here is the GDP economic growth of the two economies for the past, say, 15 years or so. From 2007 through 2022. Let's look at the financial crisis period back in 2008 and 2009, when US economy went down to the negative range, minus 0.1 for 2008 and minus 2.5 for 2009. Whereas Chinese economy went through this period relatively smoothly by registering more than 9% of economic growth. That was amazing. But of course, before that, it was 14%. So it was a decline by the Chinese standard, but still, it was a very high growth maintained during this difficult period. Then after that, US economy was gradually recovering to register a positive growth of, say, 2.2% or 2.5% or so on. Whereas China kept on growing at almost double-digit rate and then started to decline. And then down to 7%, 9%, 6% range, okay? So the difference in the growth rates between the US and China has been gradually declining from 8 percentage point to 7, 6, 5, and then for the last 2 or 3 years, the difference has been about 4% or 4.5 percentage point until the current crisis. So 4 percentage point is very huge. That's why many observers predicted that the China is going to surpass the United States even in nominal terms by the year of 2028, 29, or certainly by 2030. But here comes the current crisis. US economy registered minus 4.3%. That's greater than the negative growth for the United States back in the global financial crisis period, but it was such a short-term decline. And then US economy quickly rebounding to register more than 6% this year. Chinese economy is also rebounding from 2% range to 8% range. But if you look into the next year, US economy will continue recovering to register more than 4%, while the Chinese economy is going to slow down to 5% level. Why is that? That's the question we should ask ourselves. Maybe due to most likely due to the international or world environment, economic environment in the world, which is, not quite favorable for the Chinese economy compared to the United States. We are going to discuss that a little later. So the question is, looking at the past experience may not help much to predict the future of the US economy and Chinese economy and their comparison, okay? Because now for next year difference is only 1% or so, not the 4% or 5% in the past. So is this narrow gap will continue in the future, or it's going to widen again to the 4% range, 4% point range? We don't know. So we need to look at other aspects. Let me mention two most important factors to look at now. First, of course, technology, as always. Technology will determine the current and the near future and long-term future of the economy, for sure. And according to various, the statistics and measurement and the comparisons, U.S. seems to be ahead of China in the so-called global competitiveness, general competitiveness, also or digital competitiveness in general. However, China is rapidly catching up. So the question is China going to catch up with the United States completely by the end of 2020s? That's a big question. In addition, in some specific areas, like manufacturing for sure, and even in the digital areas, mobile technology, and the important sectors of artificial intelligence, China may be ahead of the US already. And probably even more important, the number of patents in the global market. The China is number one in the world, surpassing the United States. And in the case of China, many of those patents will be actually applied in manufacturing. So that's a very important factor to consider. And in addition, some say that China is widening that lead, that gap. But that's a question mark, whether US is going to catch up with China in these specific areas due to the new strategies being adopted by the new administration. So that's a current issue, as we all know. Second important factor to consider is the dependence on global economy in terms of international trade and also international investment. In terms of trade dependence, China seems to be more heavily dependent on the international trade than the United States. That's quite sure, because China has to export to support the mostly manufacturing industries, right? Whereas the U.S. economy may be standing on itself, domestic market, more than the Chinese economy. And in fact, China's trade dependence, the total value of imports and exports relative to GDP, is more than 37% in the case of China, whereas in the case of the US, that's only 26% or so. So trade dependence is greater in China. That should have quite a big impact when the global economy is so-called experiencing the decoupling between the US side and Chinese side, as many people are predicting. With regard to investment, that may be even more important than the trade in the middle term and long term. Both China and the United States are dependent on the inflow of investment from outside, or inflow of capital into each economy, as we all know. Whereas the investors are European nations and Japanese and other companies mostly. But US and China are dependent on the inflow of capital in somewhat different ways. And generally speaking, China is dependent on the relatively long-term investment, so-called long-term direct investment, such as building factories and research institutes and so on within the Chinese, within China, are invested from abroad. Whereas in the case of U.S., the economy is much more dependent on the short-term borrowing or short-term inflow of capital, like borrowing money from outside to finance the deficit, like government deficit. And so the Japanese and the Chinese and other foreign companies are buying a lot of U.S. government bonds to finance the government deficit in the case of the United States. So if the world is divided, what kind of effect is going to have on each economy? The answer may differ depending on how this capital flow will be affected in the short term and in the long term. That's something we have to discuss. Beyond 10 years from now, there will be quite a few factors affecting the economy. One of the important factors is, of course, industrial change, structural change. And in the United States, the structural change is gradually shifting toward more services and high-tech digital industries. Whereas in the case of China, there are more rapid changes from agriculture and part of manufacturing into more high-tech and digital service areas. So the question, mostly in the case of China, is it going to be smooth or disruptive to change the industrial structure? In other words, is China going to change its structure, industrial structure, smoothly to get over the so-called middle income trap? Or is it going to be rather difficult for China to get over the middle income trap, as many countries have experienced? That's one thing. Second point is population. As we know, China or Chinese government is worried about the declining population, which is so apparent, so obvious. That's why the government is relaxing the birth control policy, from one-child policy to two-child, and then 2 children, and then 3 children, and so on. But maybe too late. So Chinese total population will continue to decline. And that should have a long-term impact. Whereas the United States, by probably relaxing more immigration policies, it's going to be attracting more and more people from outside with more children. So the population growth will not be affected as much as China. So there are many factors to consider. Well, let's discuss these issues in class.